Thanks, everyone. This is talk about, well, we're going to draw some analogies between music and data. Okay. I think some people recognise our third colleague on the right. Get extra prize there. But hi, I'm Sarah Taylor. I'm the lead data engineer at RMIT University. I have a PhD in geospatial science, and I've worked in both research and data jobs since the era when number one songs on the Australian charts included Shannon Knoll with What About Me and Outcast with Hey Ya. In my spare time, I play guitar and sing in a contemporary folk band. I've also published research about live music and about musicians, and relatedly, but also just because it's quite interesting, I have read a lot of musician biographies. And this is my colleague, Darren Ware.
Hi, I'm Darren. I'm one of the senior data engineers at RMIT. I have a Master of Analytics, and I've worked in education and data since the era when bands stopped becoming famous via MySpace. I played trumpet, trombone, and saxophone in a ska punk band in the early 2000s. And someone knows what that is. That's amazing. And we both have a passion for music, so we thought we'd try and bring together our interests in data and music for this talk.
Thanks, Darren. And third on our staff card here is one David Lee Roth, sometime frontman for Van Halen, most notably in the 80s when they were arguably the quintessential 80s band. Although he's not appearing with us today, he's representative of our talk's focus, which is firstly stretching musical analogies to describe features of RMIT's journey towards implementing the modern data stack with DBT, and secondly, just good data management and testing. So some of you will know this story and go, oh, that old chestnut, and the rest of you, it's probably the only thing you'll remember me saying today, and that's okay. So one of the reasons we hired David is it's back in the 80s when Van Halen were a touring band. They went on lots of tours. That's how they made most of their money. They had big shows, big lighting systems, big PAs, things that could go wrong, things that could be dangerous. And for each venue where they'd play, they would have a contract with all the details about how things should be set up, safety reasons, and just for putting on a good show. And in there, seemingly just because it was the 80s, they had a very strict stipulation that said absolutely no brown M&Ms backstage. So the first interpretation is, what's your problem? But the real reason was they're touring. They've got a lot at stake. They can't get to every venue and go, I'm going to check through items 1 through 500 about all the voltage and all the setup and so forth. They can just get backstage and go, brown M&Ms, cancel the show. They did not read the contract. They haven't gone through all the details that we gave them. It's an ingenious way in a very short period of time to figure out something's gone wrong. So we can see that David, he's earned his place in our team. They were very good at planning, checking, testing, making things work in a tight schedule with a lot at stake. So the way we're structuring our talk today is just around 6 aphorisms or sort of pearls of wisdom that apply both in music and we've found at RMIT and the data journey there at RMIT. You'll find out as we go along how these relate to both music and data, but we'll start with Darren introducing the first. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Cool. So this first analogy is based on my experiences playing in a band back in the early 2000s, if anyone remembers how far back that was. Someone remembers ska music, which is basically reggae twice the speed with a bit of punk influence and generally with a brass section. So I used to play trumpet, and early on we had a few guitarists come and go, some drummers, but that wasn't really a big deal because every third person plays guitar. And if they play badly, you can put a bit of distortion on and hide the fact. But brass players were our big problem. So we had a lot of turnover with our brass section. I initially just played trumpet. Then we had our saxophone player leave, and we could only find another trumpet player. So I bought a saxophone, learned how to play those parts. And we had a lot of shuffling, and in the end, I ended up learning saxophone and trombone. We bailed on actually trying to find any more brass players, and it was just me with the guitar pedal adding a little bit of depth to kind of compensate for the fact that we could not keep replacing brass players. So Sarah, back to how does this tenuous analogy relate to RMIT's starting point with adopting DBT?
Sure. So, in a nutshell, keeping things going when people may or may not leave. So, RMIT began implementing the data analytics platform, which is our cloud-based data platform, back in 2021. We'll call it the DAP from now on. I started in a data engineering role around that time, maybe a couple of months into the project. It had a very clear vision. It's been well supported since then, but I had worked in data roles at RMIT before. I'd worked with data for 20 years, but even I'm not an unrehearsed newbie. I was like, what are we meant to be doing? And why is everyone leaving? A little bit of both. GBT was new to us. Snowflake was new to us. But it was a big change from on-prem to cloud-based. But also at that time, there was just, like with brass players, there was just a lot of demand for data engineers. And with a bit of push and pull factor, the vibe was a little bit confused, and then there was alluring salaries elsewhere. So for a period of time when I started there, we had a lot of like work lunches, like when people leave, which was nice, but it was kind of hard to keep things going and just say, what should I do? What am I meant to be doing? What's going to happen when person X leaves? The good news about this is that maybe about a year in, it went from being not a lot of momentum, a lot of those lunches when people were leaving, to pretty much the opposite of that. Things really happening, things starting to run quite smoothly. Obviously things never reach, a zenith of perfection, but definitely got momentum now, and we transitioned to getting, a good team culture happening. But in the meantime, we do want to plan for the worst. We want a culture where people want to stay. That's great. That's the ideal. But like drummers, brass players or whatever, people may leave, and we do want to be able to keep going when that happens. And with DBT, we actually did find that a lot easier to see what on earth that person was doing before they left.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention the picture in the previous slide was actually Spinal Tap. It wasn't my band. And there's a part at the start where they're interviewing the band, and they're talking about how their drummers keep dying under suspicious circumstances. So similar kind of theme. But yeah, so in terms of that maintaining knowledge within the business, we use Confluence like a lot of people. And a lot of people know that that's kind of the place where
documentation goes to die.
Yes, where documentation and knowledge go to die. So we try to keep that organized. But in terms of really useful stuff, the functionality of DBT, being able to embed the documentation around your models, the table descriptions, the column descriptions, really helps with data discoverability and helps people be able to find that stuff really easy with DBT docs. So that's kind of like a really helpful thing that we have found. And also in terms of avoiding the worst, implementing tests as well in those YAML files around specifying fields that should be not null and unique combinations of columns, that kind of thing as well, and having that all incorporated into one spot, one easy to find.
And having discoverable code and version control makes me want to not leave. Which is awesome.
Yes, same. And although it's a work in progress, we're seeing significant positive momentum at RMIT. The team is much more stable and confident, and we want things to be the best they can be. Which brings us to our next tenuous musical connection.
I love that some people are coming in here and seeing a picture of Liberace. Okay. So this is one of my musical heroes. I have quite a few, but Liberace is the man behind the quote, I was so upset by the reviews that I cried all the way to the bank. And he's also here dressed, casually. Why don't I just step out and slip into something more spectacular? So he's a pretty out there performer. But what made him interesting is you would think maybe based on that he would be fussy and I don't do small shows, I'm not doing that, I'm above this, I don't need to practice, I don't feel like getting out of bed today or whatever. He was the total opposite. Whatever size show he did, however old his audience, whatever he was doing, he always put on a really, really good show, and he made a special effort to try and entertain all the reluctant hangers-on, like the husbands and sons and stuff that were dragged along to the Liberace show. So he pursued best practice all the time. He didn't just get there and go, I'm done. There's a hint of that in how this applies at RMIT. It's best practice. It's a thing that you actually do regularly. It's a thing you pursue, but a thing that you do. So what does that mean for you, Darren?
So one of the ways that we ensure that we maximize our performance as a team is through knowledge sharing and carving out opportunities for cross-pollination of ideas, solving problems. We have a kind of weird structure, a weird matrix structure in our data and analytics team, which when I first started was thoroughly confusing, but now I actually really love it.
It just seems normal, and I think that everyone else has it, but it's totally not normal.
So our data and analytics teams is split up into domains. So we'll have a group that is responsible for student management side of things. We'll have another team that's responsible for research and so forth. And within those teams, you'll have someone who is responsible for part of the data pipeline. So you'll have a data engineer, you'll have a data analyst, you'll have a business partner, and you'll have data scientists and a few other miscellaneous roles. So we have a 9-day sprint. And then on the 10th day, which is just, to me, astounding that we separate that amount of time out. On the 10th day, all of the squads get together. We spend some time in the morning talking about what we have achieved as squads, what problems we've hit. It really kind of breaks down those silos between the business domains. And then for the rest of the day, we break up into our guilds, which sounds very kind of magic, but it's where all of the functional roles stick together. So this is where all of the data engineers cross-squad, spend the day together. All of the data analysts spend the rest of the day together. And it's all about professional development, new features that are coming up in DBT, for instance, that we can utilize. And yeah, it's just a fantastic approach. I know that not every company is able to do that. That picture there is just on one of our guild days. But the moral of the story really is carving out time with fellow engineers, cross-domain, if you can, find ways to make that happen. Yep.
Yeah, and over the course of the 2 years that the DAP's been in development and really picked up that momentum, one of the notable things that has improved is the process of reviewing and releasing code. It kind of went from a slightly mysterious thing, because DBT was new to most people. And I wouldn't assume, if you've got many people working remotely and you just sort of, check in every so often, or you're in an office and there's like tap, 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 I wouldn't assume that everyone's on the same page. But what happened with us is we started off looking at this process for DBT and code review and production and release, and it was a little bit like, this is a mystery. We're all going to work on this together. And then over time, so this was sort of across the squads, over time the attendance at these reviews or releases would drop down. But it's not because it was, going poorly. It's the exact opposite. It's because everyone had
uneventful.
done uneventful. What had previously been Mason's Lodge, like total mystery, just went to, oh yeah, that thing. So we all knew what to expect. We all knew what was happening. We had those shared expectations. And then when you hear tap, 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 or you don't see people for a while, it's because it's actually moving along. So that's worked really well. We are pursuing continuous improvement. We want to have better options for version control of data models, and we want to incorporate DBT Project Evaluator as we go along, but it's a work in progress. But there's definitely much more people contributing to and using the DAP now. It's gone past the point that one person can review or be on top of everything, but it is holding together, and we're still working on ways to ensure consistency, which brings us to our next aphorism.
So here's a couple of pictures of myself back in a while ago. You can see on the left-hand side here with a cow print suit and mohawk, and then eventually moving into like further along in the 2000s with the emo look. And it's probably indicative of our band, where we had people coming from different musical backgrounds, all wanting kind of to have their own influence, creating tension, everyone wanting to write a song so that it could be on the CD with their name.
What's a CD?
Yeah, exactly. What's a CD? And yeah, it created quite a bit of tension in the band because people had different stylistic approaches, and also kind of made it a little confusing. Sarah is in a contemporary folk band. Different experience for you though.
I'm not putting us forward as
We're
models.
we're not like Liberace level for sure.
I'm not putting myself forward as like, you could be like me, I'm so successful. I'm in a band with my sister, and we have been performing and recording for, I think, over 15 years now. So by some measures, that is successful. And in the many musician biographies I've read and the research I've done as well, it's very obvious that it's quite unusual to have a successful musical endeavour that's one person and one person only, because it doesn't have that sort of, the input of many people and of error control and ways of looking at things. Equally so, it's quite unusual to have everyone in the band writing a song. It's more common to have two people. It's actually the most common format. And that's what we have in our band. That's what we do. Everyone in our band does other stuff when they want to do it. But it's just like, when we're doing this thing, the Taylor Project, we are doing that. There are many ways to make great music, but right now we are doing this thing. And at RMIT, we have many people come from different work backgrounds, different ways of writing SQL, different ways of, releasing code, all that sort of stuff. Lots of ways to write SQL. There's really quite a lot. And frankly, some of them are bad, but, they're all valid in their own way. Everyone's come from these different backgrounds, but right now, we're doing it like this. We're playing in this key, and we're playing this kind of music, and it's great when everyone's together. It's always better when there's more people involved, but also we need to be basically on the same page with the style and the consistency of what we're doing, and that is valuable in and of itself, not because this style is inherently better. We have linting integrated into our release pipelines. The computer says no if you try to get things through that don't look right. But then some things, obviously, computer can't have an opinion on. So naming conventions and so forth. So we have a style guide for that. And it can seem kind of like, nightmare band material, someone going, no, don't do it like that. And I think it was James Brown? He would point to people and say, you're losing money. You did that wrong. You did it wrong.
If anyone's noticed in James Brown videos where he's doing this, he's actually fining band members for either getting things wrong or not paying attention. So,
but how did you find it coming into this James Brown-esque team?
It wasn't RMIT. James Brown-esque team.
We have standards. We've got fussy standards. Yeah.
If you want to take anything away from this talk, I would say set up standards. If you're shifting onto DBT, if you're newbies, set up your standards as soon as you can. Implementing a style guide, linting. Me coming onto the team a bit later was amazing. There were things that I really annoyed me about certain choices that had been made around the linting. I prefer leading commas to lagging commas, but they're like incidental things. But at the end of the day, and you can see it's just a little code sample there of, it's actually quite simple. There's not much transformation going, but you can see it's super tidy, hopefully. And so we could pick up another data engineer's piece of code and navigate it really quite easily. And that's still the case at the moment. So I would just strongly encourage, set up standards as early as possible. If you can make it so that it is the computer that's telling people that they can't do it rather than individuals, it also reduces a lot of tension in the team. This sort of focuses on the detail. How do we know about the bigger picture, Sarah?
So to talk about bigger picture stuff, I'm going to talk about a thing that for a while I didn't want to talk about ever again, which was the Elmore Donut Festival. So when we play in our band, I think it's a great thing that we're not a monolith. We don't only do big shows or small shows. We're quite flexible. So we'll play in bars, we'll play in pubs, festivals, but we'll also sometimes do shows up in a country town where we have connections. Very casual. Would you like to play at someone's birthday party? Would you like to play at the pool, etc.? So I think it's great that we can do those different kinds of shows, but you also need to just know enough about what's actually happening. So we're invited, would you like to play at the Elmore Donut Festival? And I'm like, I hear Elmore, that's a really small town. I hear Donut Festival. I'm like, this is a very casual thing. Sounds great. Be people sitting around eating donuts and we'll just be in the background. But when we showed up, it's actually like a big thing. There were lots of other sort of entertainers, like rides with loud noise and a petting zoo and tractors, and it was outside, and anyone, at least some of the people here deal with sound engineering, they'd go, that's so, you need to be really loud. No one will hear you if you're not prepared. We didn't think about that. We just sort of rocked up. We thought it would be casual, and it was this horrible thing where we had to go through with the show. Only maybe a couple of kids could hear us, and they were confused when they did. And mostly we were like drowned out by petting zoo and rides and tractors. And the whole donut festival became a byword for let's not.
Usually it's a nice thing when you turn up and there's a lot more audience, but not in this
We
situation.
didn't bring the right gear. All we could have done is just planned ahead a little bit. We don't have to be Van Halen. We don't have to have heaps of planning, etc. But we do need to know just enough. So at RMIT, it means we're providing data as we go along. We're not doing, no one here would be doing a waterfall. We are producing stuff that stakeholders need now, and we need to know what they actually need. We need to talk to people enough to actually ensure that we're delivering what people need, and we have the correct business logic in there, even if we're not planning the whole thing out in advance. Enough communication to know, oh yeah, we don't want the donut festival. So,
Yep. And in terms of fit for purpose, when we're doing our data modeling, another thing that was a great thing shifting into the team is that they had a very clear conceptual data model set up already. And that is basically dividing up your business domains and what subtopics are under all of those business domains, how everything relates to each other. And then that is a clear starting point for creating your dimensional modeling. So we take a just enough design upfront approach, which is where with your logical data modeling, you're planning far enough ahead to see where you can be conforming dimensions, what is going to be touching what else, iterating between the logical data model design and the physical data model design, where we have enough perspective to be creating models that are fit for purpose, that are going to be scalable, and we're going to be having less isolated, fragmented models. So that's been a really important part there. So talking about being organized, sometimes we can get it wrong, which brings us to this next story about excess baggage. So early on in my band days, I grew up in Perth, and we had a conference where quite a big band were speaking. And they said, because of Richard Branson's connections with the record industry, he actually gives you free excess baggage when you fly with Virgin. And so we had our first tour to Queensland, and unlike smart bands that hire their gear when they go on those sorts of trips, we rang up Virgin, and they were like, yeah, sure, no worries, we'll give you free excess baggage. So we brought everything. We bought the drum kits, we bought the amps, just absolutely everything. We had trolley loads of gear. We rocked up, got across to Queensland, no problems. Our first tour, so we're like, let's go to all the theme parks, spend all the money while when we're not playing. So we were like dead broke at the end of it. Call up Virgin on the way back. I don't know, are we allowed to say brand names? But anyways, we call them on the way back, and they're like, yes, that's fine. We'll give you free excess baggage. Rock up to the airport with trolley loads of gear. The lady at the counter was like, free excess baggage? No, we don't do that. Who did you talk to? And we were just like, it's a Richard Branson thing, which didn't go down too well. So we had to put everything on credit card, and it was quite an expensive endeavor paying that off in the end. How does that translate loosely back to our RMIT journey?
Back to RMIT. So I think it's great to go on a tour like that. So where we want to go to with this is it's important to be organised and avoid unexpected surprises. But by the same token, it's also important to be brave enough to try things like going on a tour, etc. Because if you just were afraid of everything, you wouldn't get anywhere with this kind of work or with music. So what we found really useful on the DAP now is having a clear enough folder structure, and of course having the exposures listed, the external exposures. Many of our exposures are dashboards like this. Big university, we don't necessarily interact with these people that are relying upon these dashboards. But definitely hear about it if something goes wrong. And what happened if you weren't really sure what dependencies you had for data is, you'd get a culture of people going, oh my gosh, don't even touch it. I don't know. Something might break. Something is the worst thing in the world to break. You actually want to know it's okay if things are vulnerable or they might cost something, but we just kind of want to know what they are. So spelling those things out makes people less afraid to try changing things than if it's something.
Yeah, and you can plan out that delivery as well, which is really helpful. I might skip around talking about folder organization and naming conventions, but both important things. And using DBT Project Evaluator, you can kind of lock in some of those naming conventions. But we've just skipped to our last analogy here.
Our last
Sarah.
analogy here is lyrics to a song that most people probably know. Wouldn't it be nice? And so one of the many biographies I've read is called I Am Brian Wilson. It's a very plain title for a very creative man. So Brian Wilson was the chief songwriter, producer, maker of things happening in the Beach Boys, an amazing band back in the 60s, for which a period of time were genuinely full rivals to the Beatles. Weirdly, they had Brian had a very bizarrely critical dad. Like, there's footage of the dad going, oh, I don't know, when Brian's trying out God Only Knows on the piano, and he's like, yeah, it's all right, whatever. So they were producing amazing stuff back in the early 60s. They had the iconic album Pet Sounds, but it did rely very much on Brian Wilson. He did pretty much everything, and when he became unwell over the next decade, it just sort of pitted out. So as amazing as those early albums were, they didn't release that much after, and there's a whole other story behind the song Kokomo, but that's a different thing. But what we get from that is we want a supportive environment, but we don't want, where people feel confident. We don't want Brian Wilson's dad, but we also don't want to rely on one person. Everyone here who's worked in data is just like, when you hear, oh, this one guy made this thing, you just go, oh God, oh no. When it's one person that has made a complicated project, no matter how amazing they are, that's very, very vulnerable, and it gets weird pretty quickly. So back with our first point, documentation helps. Team culture, sort of trying to make yourselves replaceable and having an environment where we want to foster those good ideas, but we don't want to rely on just one person knowing what the heck's going on.
Yep. Yeah. And on that fostering a nice environment, one of the points that we've sort of got there is around code review, considering it as a two-way street. A lot of people kind of think of it as a way to really pull something apart. Can be destructive. You're not doing it right. But we're trying to foster this attitude of code review being a two-way street. So it is an opportunity when you're reviewing to learn new things. So you may see a new novel way of approaching something. This little example here is me just coming across a colleague using a DBT macro that I wasn't aware of at the time. And just saying, oh, this is great because it actually tidies things up a lot. So actually acknowledging when people do something that's kind of cool or different, and also the way that you say this stuff needs changing. If you can take that attitude of like use it as a teaching moment, if you can, then you're fostering this much more positive environment where you're kind of building each other up, but also building yourself up. I try and encourage.
You're an expert at it, Darren. Not everyone.
But I try and encourage people who don't do a lot of code review to go in and do it because it's also good for yourself. As frustrating as it is taking up quite a lot of time, it is a worthwhile occupation. Sarah, do you want to just briefly touch on future state?
Yeah, so just to wrap up before we summarise, what we're working towards with the DAP data analytics platform, we are not arrogant enough to think this is the end of data transformations at RMIT. This is where we're at now. We have found DBT to be extremely useful, and obviously everyone else here has as well. It's going very well. We know that in the future, just like fashions with music, things will go out of fashion and there'll be a new thing. In like 20 years, there'll be people here laughing at whatever like music technology we were using at the time, etc. That's how these things go. Things change, but we want to leave something behind that our future selves or some other future person will read and go, I mostly understand what they're doing. This holds up well. A lot of old music recordings hold up really well. So it's not just a function of being old or new. There's some principles that apply no matter what the platform. It happens to be that our current platform does make it a lot easier, but we're also putting in that sort of teamwork to try and have something that holds up pretty well in the future, even though we know we're not the end of the story for RMIT and data. And I think you had a dad joke to wrap up, Darren.
Yes, in the great words of you two, if you still haven't found what you're looking for, you may need to improve your documentation in your YAML files. Thanks, everyone, and have a good afternoon.